So that saves me the first thing I normally go on about, which is time management. What's the one thing you never get again? What's the one thing you never have again?
First impression.
Well, there's that. That's true. That's actually true. What else?
Time.
Yeah, the time it took you to think about the one thing you don't have more of, which is time. The time that it takes to think about it is the time you won't have again. So making the assumption that you want to use your time effectively, one of the key messages about any type of leadership role is, you can be effective with your time or you can be ineffective with your time. If you're effective with your time, it allows you to do something very important, which is to balance work and play. And so throughout your careers, you're going to have an opportunity on, how long is your working day. And a working day has got nothing whatsoever to do with how long you can make it. Some people get that wrong. Some people think, oh, if I can work a 14-hour day or a 16-hour day, somehow that makes me, a really important person. It's completely rubbish. What makes you an important person is how efficient you are. How successful you are will depend on how well you can cycle information and how well you can actually use the time that you have. And obviously, one of the things is that if you start a meeting and you have 15 people in the room and then one person's late and you're waiting for that one person, those 15 people are wasting their time. So the reason why I think it's always, I'm not talking about my class, I'm talking about generally whenever you're in a position where you're calling a meeting or you're going to a meeting, always try and be on time. Anything less than that means that you're causing other people to be inefficient. It also, by the way, means that you need to end on time. People focus on, well, if we start on time, that's okay. If we end a little later, no big problem. What's the problem if you end late? If you're in a busy day and you end a little bit late, what happens to your next meeting?
You're being late for it.
You're going to be late for it. If you're late finishing, well, what's happened is you've just pushed. It's dominoes. You've just pushed. What was meant to be a meeting starting on time to a meeting that can't start on time because you're held up in the one before. So it isn't just about the start of the meeting, it's about the end of the meeting, which creates all sorts of dynamics. And we'll talk about this in terms of skills of leadership, but the dynamics that it causes is, well, how much discussion can you allow, how quickly you can cycle through the points, how much information you take out of people, whether or not people feel that they've been heard, whether you start at one pace, nice slow pace, because we have the whole evening, and by the end of the evening you're kind of rushing through it because you're desperately trying to get through the agenda. So time management is very important, and you all demonstrated an early commitment to it, so thank you very much. I've seen, and actually rather than just look at it on a piece of paper, I'm going to ask you to just go around the class as it's our first night together. I've seen sort of who you are. It's a very strong class. This is actually, I taught this class last year, it was a different caliber. I'm very excited at the caliber of the people in the room. I guess before I ask you to introduce yourself, maybe I should introduce myself. My name's Stuart Lawson. I have been in Russia on the 18th of November. It will be 20 years, which is for me a big anniversary. I thought when I arrived in November 1995 that I'd be staying for a year, maybe 2, maximum 3. I was setting up Citibank in Russia. This was a big opportunity for me. There's some stories that come out of what happened to my first assignment, but the reality is that 20 years later, I'm still here. I'm with EY. I'm on the advisory. So there's somebody here from EY. Who's the EY person?
Yeah, it's me.
Oh, 2 of you. I know. Fine, great. So you can report directly back to my colleagues. That's good. Are you actually? You're in the firm now, and you're doing this at night?
Yes.
Wow, God, I don't know how you get through the working day and then you have to deal with me in the evenings, boy. I'm at EY. I'm obviously advisory in terms of the banks, but I also help the practice with the fact that I've been a CEO of 4 banks over 15 years, and obviously therefore I've got a fairly deep Rolodex set of contacts, which span sort of both the industry in terms of the banks, but also the industries of the companies that have been my clients for all these years. I had 25 years at Citibank, which was extremely exciting, exhilarating in fact. I joined at the age of 21 out of Oxford, and I decided, I actually understood that I had to start traveling if I was going to get the sort of interest that I was looking for. And by the age of 27, I was running the bank in Kenya when there was a coup, and we'll be talking about crisis management because I got a little exercise in crisis management courtesy of an unexpected coup in Kenya in 1982. And then basically after that event, Citibank decided that it was a good idea to move me around as their crisis manager. And for many years I moved from one country to the next, basically dealing on the corporate banking side with wherever they had problems. So basically it went something like England, Scotland, then Kenya, crisis, then Athens looking at things, then Cairo, crisis, then Paris looking at things, then Norway, crisis. Then there was a 5-year break when I did leverage buyouts, restructurings in the European market, which was very interesting because we actually started by doing these huge leverage buyout deals, and I can talk about corporate finance quite well. I can talk about corporate finance, it's a little bit aged in terms of 88, but the way in which it's done is still the same, nothing much has changed. So we did that from 88 to 90, and then in 91 there was a big recession, and I ended up having to restructure a bunch of my own deals, which was a pretty interesting thing to have to do. It taught me a lot about how important documentation is, taught me a lot about the integrity of clients, actually having to go back into a room with people that you've just celebrated the deal with and have to renegotiate that transaction. I mean, that's a pretty interesting process. Then after that, Citi gave me a very interesting assignment, which was to run the Italian business. And that was very interesting because at the time in '93, Italy was going through a major crisis. They were locking up all their senior business people, all their senior politicians, and my main client I went to negotiate with. Well, 10 days later he went to his villa and shot himself in the head. So things weren't obviously going terribly well in Italy during 93 and 95 to 95. So that takes us to 95. 95 I set up Citibank. 98 I went to Puerto Rico, which is a long way away. 2000 I came back to be the chairman of Delta Bank, which was the first bank that did consumer finance. Very interesting the way that consumer finance started. Obviously it was the beginning of what became a big trend. And then I got the offer from Hodorkovsky to be the chairman of Menatep, Menatep Bank, which was an amalgamation of Trust Bank and Menatep. I have to say most people look at me and say, well, why on earth would anybody take a job from Hodorkovsky? And the answer is I took the job in June 2003. In June 2003 he was the richest man in Europe. He ran what was at that point an aggregated bank that was ranked number 5 in Russia. It was a fantastic opportunity. 6 weeks later Platon Lebedev was in jail, and 5 months later he was in jail, and obviously the whole thing became complicated. So it's complicated, as you say on Facebook. So then in March of 2004, Deripaska hired me to run his bank. So I got a pretty good airing with the oligarchs. I ran his bank for 4 years. I built a retail bank, a corporate bank, a treasury, out of basically what was a private bank, which means a captive bank. So that was a very interesting process, dealing with Hodorkovsky, dealing with Basic Element. It had a lot of dynamics in it. At the end of 2007, we parted ways. I actually thought that was the end of Russia, but 3 months later I was running HSBC. So I actually ran HSBC for a period of 2 years, launched their retail business and their private banking business, as well as running their corporate business. But then, as you know, or you probably know, they closed their retail business. At that point it was pretty clear that I wasn't the guy to hire and then fire the 400 people. Did I hire anybody in the room? Just wondering. Have I ever hired anybody in the room? Just wondering. Okay. So I hired a bunch of people, and then obviously we had to wind that down. I then left, joined EY. In terms of my lecturing, I lecture at Oxford, Imperial, Duke, Columbia, Vlerick, and then 4 or 5, 6 universities here. So I've had quite a lot of experience recently, over the last 5 years, of trying to get my experience in a format that I can actually pass it on. It's one thing to have all the experience, it's another thing to find a way of trying to pass it on. And really my objective, and I want to hear what your objectives are, but my objective over the time that we have together is to take my 35 years of experience in 11 countries, my time as a crisis manager, my time as a CEO of 4 banks, and try and pass on as much as possible to you. That's the good news. The good news is I've got a lot of experience, I've got a lot of, I hope, relevant lessons for you in terms of both your personal development but also in terms of business. It isn't limited to corporate banking, it's corporate banking, retail banking, investment banking, and then it isn't limited to banking, it's actually leadership in any of the environments that you find yourself. So what I'm hoping to do is that's what I want to achieve. The bad news is, folks, as you're about to see from my brilliant presentations, I do not have brilliant presentations. If there's anybody out there that knows a good design bureau or somebody that I can work with to actually make this stuff look as though I'm somewhere in the current century or millennia, it would be great. But unfortunately, I wrote the stuff myself. Everything that you're going to see is based on the experience that I've had. So it's pretty rough and ready in terms of a presentational style. My colleagues at EY will probably shrivel in embarrassment at the concept that an EY guy can make a presentation like this. I apologize. Don't let the materials get in the way of the message. And the other thing I would say is that if you think I'm going to stand up here for 3 hours tonight and just talk at you and then come back and do it again for 3.5 hours and come back and do it for 4 hours, you're wrong. I can't do that. I can't simply stand here and download. It has to be a dialogue. If it isn't a dialogue, you're going to fall asleep, I'm going to fall asleep, the dynamic will just go out of the room. It's a terrible room to have to lecture in anyway. It would be made a lot worse if we all just sat here and all I did was talk. So I want you to interrupt, I want you to ask questions, I want you to challenge me. I'm not shy. There's nothing that I'm going to talk about over the time that we have together that I can't debate. And there's a lot that I hope I learn from you. I mean, I have to say, the best part to me of this this thing about being a lecturer, this thing about actually talking about my life, particularly when we get to something I call successful failure, which is when I actually talk about how you succeed, how you make the best out of failure. I have to get very personal. I can't do that as an academic exercise. I have to talk about the moments which really didn't work for me. And each time I do that, I get more out of it by being completely open. And I also, during the course of the lectures, it depends on the students obviously, but I normally walk away with a whole bunch of new perspectives based on what they have to say. So that's who I am, and the topics that we're going to talk about are leadership topics, but they're not limited to leadership topics. If anybody wants to go off on a tangent, talk about corporate finance, talk about marketing, talk about PR, talk about anything that is of interest to you, please feel completely free. And one of the things I will do is I will ask you for topics that you want to cover outside of the ones that I may be talking about, so that we can start, and this is what makes it fun for me, is that actually I don't know what you want to talk about, and then when you tell me what you want to talk about, I go away, and the next time you see me I've got something to say, and if I have nothing to say, well, I'll tell you I have nothing to say. Is that relatively clear? Yes? No?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Now, can we do something just very... I know you all know each other, and so this is a bit boring, but as I don't know you, can we start over here and work back and forth, and can you just tell me your name, and just not your life story, not like I just did, but something that says what you've done, and also something that if there's anything particular that you're interested in, that that you've come to these sort of classes, if there's something you want to talk about specifically. You're on.
Okay, my name is Alexander Levinsky. Actually, I'm an asset manager. I hold a senior position, and we manage institutional clients' assets. These are pension funds, and actually, what I see in this course, I guess I want to learn how to proceed in my career, how to lead people I work with. I want to make the environment I work in more efficient, I guess, because it is important for the results of the whole company and for my results as an employee of this company.
Yeah, okay, fine. I mean, one of the things that's obvious, by the way, is your own, leveraging your time, leveraging your sphere of influence, leveraging your concepts, your thoughts. That's what leadership is about. At the end of the day, one of the elements of leadership is, as an individual, how much sphere of influence can you have? When I was running a small corporate bank with 15 people in it, that was one thing. When I ran a bank that had 3,000 people in it, that was another thing. And how you change your leadership style according to not just the environment that you're in, not just the number of people that you have, but actually times within an economic cycle is very relevant. So that's fine, yeah.
Hello.
Hi.
My name is LeaderShip. I work for a company who specializes in complex security, work in treasury.
Mm-hmm.
I'm here to improve my knowledge. I want to better understand risks, risk management especially.
Mm-hmm.
Leadership is interesting for me because I'm sure that this sphere is useful whenever you become manager.
Well, actually, whenever you become a leader, I will make a difference for you. We'll start tonight. Management and leadership are two different things, and we'll talk about the difference between them. And then in terms of risk, well, if you don't know how to deal with risk, and by the way, risk, people think of risk, oh, risk is financial risk. Risk, there are many different flavors of risk, and if you don't know how to deal with risk, well, what is it? No risk, no return. So if you create a riskless environment, you're going to actually go out of business. So risk is a good thing to know about. I agree.
Hi, my name is Andrei. I work in Alpha Bank, and I'm here. I interested in time management and risk management, and I understood that you are good. You have good practice, and I think that I hear more about it.
Okay, well, you're fine. I mean, you definitely will hear more about it, and hopefully you'll learn stuff. I know Alpha pretty well. Shmita is a friend of mine, and I've known the bank for a long time. So yeah.
My name is Oleg Sudakov. I trade in stocks. Now I'm a private trader. Previously, I worked in an asset management company and as a sell-side analyst. So my goal here is to improve my knowledge concerning the asset management issues, and also I would like to, let's say, to develop some kind of soft skills that could allow me to deal with people better, to understand them and to guide them.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I'm not going to cover asset management. I'm not an expert at it. When I can talk about credit stuff and I can talk about the economy, and if people are interested at some point, I will actually talk about my views on what's happening in Russia and where we're going, because I do a lot of that anyway. But in terms of soft skills, how you deal with people, business is just interaction of people. Don't get fooled. I mean, the fact is that yes, there's all sorts of models and there's all sorts of other inputs, but ultimately, if you can't manage your relationships with other people, you're not. Well, you can be a sole trader. You can manage up to a certain point on trading through models, but over time you need people around you. And by the way, in your private life, it's pretty a handy thing too. Yeah.
Good evening. My name is Dmitry Primashov. I'm a grade analyst at Rosbank, Societe Generale Group, and I want to get to know how to develop the soft skills that will allow me to be a good communicator and to be a good head, because I'm going to develop as a head of unit in credit analysis in the future. I'm also interested in some related topics like leverage finance, like project financing, and I'm also considering to maybe some career in the real sector of economy, like a chief financial officer in the future. But
Okay, I mean, one of the things that I'm not going to do here, I mean, it's up to you as a group. I'm going to try and keep things as broad as possible and as general as possible. I can give you a class in banking, obviously. I can give you a class in, leverage buyouts and how to structure transactions and things like that. But because you're such a diverse group, I think it's going to cause some people to be interested and some people to, drift off. So I think we're going to keep it as general as possible for as long as possible. If there are specific topics that specifically you want to get to me, grab me in a break and we'll see if we can set up some time around the time that we're in the class and I can give you feedback. I can't obviously deal with everybody's specific technical needs, but where I can, I'll do the best I can. By the way, we've started at the front. By the time we get to the back, if you just think you're going to repeat what somebody else has said, just say it's already been said. Don't think if the guy in the back somewhere over there is thinking, oh crap, there's 30 people before me, what am I going to say? Don't worry about it. If it's been covered already, you can just say it's been covered. Yeah.
Good evening, my name is Ganev Renato. I'm a key account manager for corporate clients at Alpha Bank Russia. And I want to know more about leadership and personal efficiency at your course.
Okay, seems like we'll cover that.
Hello, my name is Victoria Vasilyeva. I'm a credit valuation department. My company works in the real estate area. This course is interesting for me because I want to know more about time management, and I want to improve my skills in leadership because I want to be example for my people.
No, that's great. I mean, by the way, one of the things you're going to cover during this period is crisis management. Obviously, as a guy who ran Citibank's crisis management response for 14 years, I obviously learned from an early stage, actually from when I was 27 in the middle of the African coup, what it is to be in a crisis and what you have to do. And I've had the opportunity of actually observing what works and what doesn't work. The one thing that I would say up front, and I'll say it when we get to that particular part, is don't ever think that two crises are the same, even if you're very experienced. No two crises are the same, and don't ever expect people to react in exactly the same way, because no two people do react in exactly the same way. But I think, having said that, I can give you enough of my experience from enough in different environments that I'll be able to hopefully help you to navigate some of the issues that you might face in a crisis. And we're obviously in the middle of one if you hadn't noticed. Yeah.
My name is Andrew Smirnov. I'm from IT department, one of the Russian banks, but now bank lose license and I looking new job. So.
Okay. Hopefully I'll be able, again, actually one of the things I always said about IT people, if an IT person can't confuse me by the third slide, they're not good at their job. I've never been able to get past the third slide. All you guys, you all start off with something incredibly simple, and within 3 slides, gone. So actually the IT people, the IT experts, are in a very special position because that you have access to information which, even as an experienced business manager, I don't mean the 3rd slide, I mean the 10th slide, I don't mean that. But the fact is that you understand a realm of information that as normal people, business people, we don't, and it's your job to be able to advise, the business, the P&L people, how to take what sort of level of investment. One thing that I've come across in one of the banks that I ran was my IT head had never, he'd never written anything down. And that meant that he had a job for life because he was the only guy in the bank that knew how the code was written. And he intended to keep it that way. Well, the problem for us was that if we tried to remove him, we removed the only guy that knew the architecture of the IT systems, but on the other hand, we couldn't possibly leave him in that role. So it was quite a complicated process to get the information out of him, because he understood that the moment that we got the information out and we standardized it and institutionalized it, his unique role would disappear. And actually we had to sort of work around it with consultants, and eventually we got where we needed to go. I have enormous respect for IT people. I'm scared to death of them, by the way. So, yeah.
My name is Sergey. I'm currently unemployed, and so I'm just studying now.
Mhm.
From your course, I would like to get as much knowledge as I can based on your experience, I would say.
Well, okay, that's all yours. You're welcome. Hopefully I've got some things to help you. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Mikhail Vasily. I'm working in a financial government agency as a head of a department. Now, in this course, I'm very interested in how to manage and how to keep in control complex government systems, organization systems, and how to keep in touch and keep in control different issues and different problems in different areas, as similar to each government agency or in finance.
Well, I'm going to be able to help you with the control environment. I'm going to be able to help you with the systemization of the way in which you manage. I've never worked in a government agency, so I'm not going to be able to help you with the specifics of that. But I can certainly talk about, you know, one of the reasons that we have processes in the banking sector, for instance, is that without control, I don't know how many people watch The Simpsons. Anybody watch the? Okay, the people who watch The Simpsons, the opening credits, right? You've got Marge, she's driving, and next to her you've got Maggie, and she's driving as well, but she's driving with a fake little steering wheel, and that's what you do if you don't have a controlled environment. You're sitting there at the front of the car. You think you're driving, but actually it's not connected to anything. You're not going to influence anything. So the objective of a control environment is that everything else that I tell you, everything else you're going to learn, only works if you're in a controlled environment. If you're in a completely uncontrolled environment, then you don't have the ability to influence in the same way that you do in a controlled environment. The obvious exception is anybody working in true startup mode or in true intellectual property mode or in true creativity, and where you're doing that, you still have to have a somewhat controlled environment, but it's controlled within much broader boundaries. And that allows people to do a lot more, which is free-form than in another type of environment.
Hi, my name is Ilya. I used to work for Moscow Exchange, then for banks, and now I'm working with new investment projects at one regional government.
Oh, okay.
The reason I'm here is in order to understand how to manage people, how to manage process, actually the same.
Okay. And by the way, I completely understand when you say manage people. I am going to keep coming back to the difference between management and leadership. And management is and one of the things that you'll hear from me when we get into this is that I became an incredibly good manager and an incredibly bad leader. Actually, one of my stories when I talk to you about failure is because Citibank continued to promote me on the basis of my crisis management skills, my set of skills that were all about how to manage. But unfortunately what they then did is they promoted me to a leadership role. And when I went from management to leadership, nobody actually took the time, sadly, to sit me down and say, listen, that stuff that you did as management, it's relevant, but it's no longer the key tools that you can use as you move into a leadership role. So and I know you meant leadership and management, but whenever I hear management, I always want to say management/leadership. Okay. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Maxim. Currently I'm working at Rosneft oil company in research department as an analyst. Actually, sometimes we are trying to answer every question of our management, and here I'm mostly interested in soft skills, and probably I'd like to just have an understanding of how managers think about the process in large companies.
Well, I'll tell you one thing that's very useful for everybody in the room to know. It's how to manage your boss. Because we all think we manage the people below us. Actually, we have to manage the people above us. And if you get it wrong, and I have consecutively got it wrong on many occasions, you never win that fight. Don't think that, really, if there's anybody that thinks they can take their boss on, win, and then get promoted, take their job, move on, good luck with that. The fact is that eventually, of course, if you're successful, you do move up, you do maybe get your boss's job. But if you think you're going to do it by confronting your boss, The only thing I'll tell you for sure is that bosses have ways of getting you back. And so it's how you manage that process that's very important. And confrontation is almost never the answer. And I can tell you that because my style was always confrontation. So I always ended up losing those fights. Yeah.
Antonenko Natalia, Statistics Department of Bank of Russia. So I just want to improve some behavioral skills, maybe something like this.
You don't want to change your management.
Yes, I want to change my management also.
Okay. Yeah.
My name is David. I work at Sberbank in Customer Relationship Management Department. Key responsibilities on my position is to be able in construction and providing statistical modeling. Accordingly, my purpose is to be here, just to get to know about your point of view to leadership, what more important is here, what best, how to do it right.
Okay, I mean, the fact is, you know, I'm going to tell you about how to do it right, and I'm also going to tell you about how to do it wrong. Not that I recommend you do it the wrong way, but that actually I've done it the wrong way, so I'm sort of like in a really good position. See, I'm also, you know, I'm very lucky because I'm also in this position where I'm at that stage in my career where I can talk completely openly about my failures. If you're in the middle, if you're right in the middle of your career, and you're, you know, I'm the chairman of a bank and I come in here and I'm the chairman of the CEO of HSBC and I start talking to you about how I screwed up at Citibank and how I don't do this and how I don't do that, it damages my brand reputation in a role where I am actually still leading people, in a role where I'm still in an executive capacity. I'm in this wonderful position now where I'm looking back over 35 years. Hopefully my business life is certainly not over, but my need to protect my brand by continuing to advertise my brand in the way of a leader has gone. That moment has gone. And I can now genuinely and openly share both positive and negative elements of my experience, which I find very liberating. Yeah.
My name is Елена Panova. I am a credit risk analyst in Sberbank. And I would like to know more about crisis management.
Yeah, okay. We're going to have a whole session on it. And actually what I've done is I've written some crisis management case studies, which when you're being asked in these case studies, what should you do in this situation, I can tell you the answer because I was that person. So, you know, I'm hoping that you'll be able to actually enjoy going through those cases. Obviously, some of them you're going to say, this is ridiculous, we're in Moscow, why do we need to talk about what happened in Milan or what happened in Nairobi? The fact is that there's streams of information that comes out of talking about the case that's relevant, you know, in all sorts of environments.
Good evening.
Yeah.
My name is Andrei. I'm working at Sibur company. So Sibur is Russian biggest gas processing company, and I'm responsible there for business development projects, which means to increase the value of downstream of gas processing. And so my interests are regarding to leadership is to listen our clever man.
You better go to another class then. You're in the wrong room.
Yeah. How to, for instance, how to make people do what you need.
Yeah.
For instance, or how to achieve objectives in negotiations.
Okay.
For instance, how to say an important thing, not saying it directly.
Yeah, it's very important. And negotiations is also something we'll talk about. By the way, in 2009, I saw your CEO, and I told him that the line of credit that he thought he had from HSBC was no longer available. So that was an interesting meeting. And I had a similar meeting with Alpha Bank in 1996, when we had a line of credit to Alpha Echo, and I met with Mr. Avin and Mr. Friedman, and told them that they had to repay their loan. That was another interesting meeting. So I've had some interaction with your companies. Yeah.
Good evening. My name is Dmitry. I'm also some kind of crisis management manager, but from the perspective of operational risks, working for VTB Capital Moscow based. So the reason why I'm here is quite simple. As I'm running a startup, I need my team not to lose their interest and passion.
Oh, good. Yeah, good. I love those words. When we talk about, when we get to talking about leadership in depth, I split leadership between skills and characteristics. Skills I can teach you in a classroom. Characteristics you learn by yourself. Characteristics are those things that experiences create in you that make you who you are. And those characteristics of leadership are very, very important. You can't get there, you can't get into a leadership role without being able to develop certain characteristics. And so when we get into that section of it, what we'll do is we'll start thinking of, what are the characteristics of leadership? And characteristics of leadership, you don't need them all. Different people need different characteristics. And by the way, the same people in different times need different characteristics. So it's not just that everybody has a different set of these characteristics. It's that actually, as you go through your life, as you go through your career, so those characteristics actually shift. And you may find that you're more reliant on some and less reliant on others at certain times, and then it gets reversed. So it's a very interesting topic. And when you talk about passion, passion is one of those characteristics that actually I believe that passion is one of the ones that you actually need for any type of leadership. But we'll get into that when we get there. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Ilya. I'm a project manager in CIB Risk Department in Sberbank, responsible for development and application of credit risk methodology in trade finance and commodity trade finance that Sberbank and Sberbank Group does.
Mm-hmm.
I'm here because I'm interested in learning from the vast professional experience that you have, especially in banking management, and I hope that you will be willing to share it.
The one thing I'll tell you for sure, I don't know how much you get out of the course, but I am willing to share it. So we'll see where we get to at the end of it. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Evgeny. I'm financial director at a little telecommunication company. We have not more than 100 people. And my main goal is how to be a leader, because I am a good manager, but I can't understand how to lead people.
Yeah, well, the first thing, you've already made the first step. I mean, the fact that you say that, you've already made the first step. I think most people think somehow that management is just, leadership is, management with a capital M. And the fact that you understand there's a difference between management and leadership, you're already on your way. I, unfortunately, when I went through my shift between management and leadership, didn't stop for 1 minute. I just assumed that it was the stuff that worked before, where I just have to work harder at it, and that would be leadership. And of course, that's the wrong way of going about it. Yeah, okay, fine.
Hi, my name is Roman Chizhov. I'm an auditor at EY. I've been there for 4 years already. And
which industry are you in?
Energy, chemical, and utilities companies. I'm interested to listen several practical stories from you concerning leadership based on your experience.
Okay, well, that's what you'll get.
Hello, I'm Julia. Now I'm working at Treasury Department in Orient Express Bank, and here I want to develop my personal efficiency and to hear you several stories about your large experience in leaderships, and I hope that I become an example for my colleagues, for example.
Well, that's fine.
I'll do my best.
Yeah, I mean, the fact is, when you hear my stories, of course, one of the things you've got to understand, I wrote a book, by the way, and I've just had it translated into Russian, and it's 19 stories from 11 countries. I wrote it when I turned 60, and I gave it to all my guests, each story is a story with a moral at the end. And the story by itself isn't, that isn't very interesting. It's the story plus the moral. And I think that the point about telling stories is that you tell the story because it isn't just that you're telling a story. This is once upon a time Stuart Lawson did this and that and the other. It's what, and so. It's the and so in the story that makes the difference between something that's just sort of maybe relatively interesting and something that's educational. Yeah.
Yeah, hello, my name is Kirill. I work at BTB as an analyst in trade finance department. And I want to hear about your experience leading large banks and about motivating people.
Okay, well, I can do that.
Me?
Yep.
Hi, my name is Oleg. I'm head of business planning and analysis department in Ashkutia, which is one of the largest privately held banks.
And the fastest growing, yep.
Yes, thank you. I'm here for not any particular thing, just to want to hear you, to find out the relevant and useful nuances from any topic you can tell us.
Yeah, and actually, by the way, actually there's a lot of bankers in the room, but you know, this works if I can, I mean, hopefully you walk away from this with some things about, you know, business life, but also things about how you live your life. I'm no particular, you know, it's like this is not the perfect way to end at the age of 60, but the fact is that I have learned some things along the way because I've been around longer than you have, and if I can, you know, pass on things not just in your business life, but actually just generally, then I will. So yeah, sure.
So I'm Alexander Rojov. I work at Ernst & Young. So this year will be my first year as a manager. Work in IT risk and assurance. Preferably with financial institutions. Also I specialized in business continuity, so I think that your experience in crisis management will be very interesting for me. Also I like your story of your life, so your career path, and I think it will be very interesting.
Okay, cool.
Hello, my name is Yura. I was working in a Big Four company in audit department for 5 years. Here I'd like to develop some soft skills, communication skills, and hope to hear some insights on leadership from you, from practical point of view.
Okay. Okay. And
my name is Andrew. I work in Bank of Russia next reserve management department as a trader. I want to get some kind of skills for leading of small groups of people.
Okay. Well, thank you all very much. I mean, you know, what makes me feel good about this is, first of all, I think your expectations are managed. You know that you're not here to learn about risk management. You're not here to learn about how to structure modeling for, you know, DCF analysis in corporate finance. You're not here to have an academic discussion about, you know, how markets should work. You're here to hear practical stories and hopefully pick up some practical pointers. And that's exactly the sort of audience that I want to talk to. So thank you all. I mean, I've written down some stuff. You know, I'll tick off what I think we get to. If I, obviously, to the extent that I haven't covered it, just, you know, break. I don't work on the. Well, you can do the hands up thing, but you can also just, you know, sort of break in at any point. Okay, so I think you all got your homework, right? Which was to think of a leader. Did you all see that? Are you getting emails, you know, that go out? Yes?
Yes.
Did anybody not get it? Okay. The idea here is at the start of each of these sessions, and you know, we'll just so, by the way, to manage people's expectation for tonight. I was going to do 3.5 hours. I'll do 3. I'll do 3 this time, 3.5 hours next time, and 4 hours on the final one. I'll bring a pet leader of mine. I have a few that I keep in cages and I bring them out occasionally. This particular guy is, I think, one of the strongest of his type. He's an incredibly good guy, and I do a sort of interview at the front of the class in which I ask him a series of questions, and then you guys can chime in and ask whatever else you want to ask. But the reason why I like this Who's Your Favorite Leader is it begins to tease out some of the issues and some of the subjects that I want to get to when we get into leadership. So who's got the first, I'm not going to pick someone, somebody volunteer. Who's your favorite leader, past or present, real or imagined? What were the skills they used and what were the characteristics that they demonstrated? Who's up first? I can pick it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess my leader is Elon Musk. Actually, this guy is...
have you read his recent biography?
Yes, I have read the book which he has written. Also, he lectures.
Yeah.
I guess he lectures in Harvard or MIT, I don't know.
Yeah.
recall where exactly, but he.
Does everybody know who this guy is? Musk?
Of course.
He's going to change your lives. He's already changed your lives. And he's only just started. So, yeah, okay.
Yes, so he's bold enough to change the.
Is that a characteristic?
Yes, I guess this is the characteristic which he possesses. Also, he's very empathetic and.
Do you think so? Do you really think so?
Yes,
okay.
And also he can organize. The very important thing about him is that he can organize and bring people and processes and money together.
Okay, is that a skill or a characteristic?
This is a characteristic.
I think it's a skill.
Okay, this is.
No, I mean, I think because you see, the thing, if you want to know what's a skill and what's a characteristic, you can be taught how to organize things. You can't be taught how to be bold. Do you see the difference?
Yes.
So when you talk about he has the what you meant was he has the skills to organize processes and to organize people to be efficient. And that skill is something that you can learn. So keep going. Yeah, so organizational processes.
Yeah, so organizational processes. Also he envisions future and he envisions the ideas which will change the understanding of the things.
So he's a visionary.
Yeah, he's a visionary.
Yeah, okay, that isn't something that you can go to work. You know, I can't teach you how to be a visionary. Yeah, you know, whenever you get into this characteristics versus skills, think about what the class is that you go to that teaches you how to be a visionary. You know, to be a visionary, true visionary, as I think he is, this is something, because I also ask, are leaders born or bred? You know, and the idea is do you pop out as, you know, a visionary, as being bold, isn't it? Or do you over time create the capacity? And some things, like courage, I believe, are sort of DNA, but the fact is that experiences draw out that type of characteristic. So some of the characteristics you have in your DNA, some people have it easier than others, but others are truly characteristics that you develop through your life experience. The most obvious one, the most obvious characteristic is wisdom. You don't turn out a wise baby, you know. You don't turn out as a wise 7-year-old. And if you do, there's something basically wrong with it. I mean, the fact is that you keep sticking your finger into electric sockets, it keeps getting shocked, eventually you don't do it anymore, you are developing wisdom. And that's what happens. And one of my core messages to you is never fear failure. You should embrace failure. Failure is the opportunity to learn. There's a great quotation which I can never remember who it's from, and I can never really remember how to say it, but it's something along the lines of, success is a lousy teacher, it convinces us that we're right. Failure is truly an opportunity to learn. And that's really, you know, that's a fundamental part about how you develop in life. But so, well, anything else about this guy?
Yes, I can say that he have this kind of persistence.
Persistence.
Yes, he's persistent for his ideas, and no failure can stop him from achieving what he wants.
Yeah. Wow. Cool guy, eh?
Yeah.
I mean, and I mean, not just a cool guy, but you know, he didn't limit it to developing one product. You know, he thought it all through. I mean, and with the you know, and I want one of his cars, you know, but it isn't just that you get an electric car, it's that you can get a battery that goes in and out and gets charged very quickly, or you can just replace it. It isn't just that you get a battery, but then he sells the batteries for for homes, so that you can take the power off the grid and use it cheaply at peak times. It isn't just that he's done all that on the ground, but then he starts to do the stuff, I want to populate Mars. I mean, who wants to populate Mars? I mean, you know, I walk into a business and I say, we're all here to populate Mars. I mean, you know, how many people are going to have that vision and then be able to actually get people to buy into it? And a really important part of leadership is not simply having the vision, because actually if you have the vision but you're not communicating it, guess what? You're kind of like the cranky, the kind of crazy guy, you know, walking down the street saying, we're going to go to Mars, we're going to go to Mars. Nobody's paying any attention. So it's no good being just a visionary if you can't communicate and you can't cause people to get on board the bus. You know, if you say we're all going to Mars and everybody goes, you know, forget it, you're mad. well, you know, then you will walk out. I still think I'm going to Mars, but nobody's building spaceships. And the fact is that if you can't convert vision through communication into leadership, because that's what you're doing. And a lot of the time with leadership, that's actually what's involved. It is that by itself, because leaders look over horizons. Leaders see things other people don't see. It's kind of like one of the things they have to do. They have to be able to look past tomorrow to the future, a strategic future, a future far, far away, and be able to then take that future, bring it back to today, communicate it in a way that people buy into that as a vision, and then energize people through processes, efficiency, execution, because you know what? All the great ideas in the world come to nothing if you can't execute.
Stuart,
yeah.
one thing here. I would challenge the idea that such guy as Elon Musk possesses a lot of empathy.
Yes.
Because, you know, such visionaries and people who think a lot ahead than those who are around them, they are not typically very responsive to any critics, to any challenges of their views, etc. And they pick the team around them based on the mutual understanding of those faraway targets that this guy pursues. So empathy in this case seems a little bit exaggerated.
Okay, hang on. What's your answer to that?
Okay, the thing is, this is the characteristic which he must possess if he wants to succeed, because he do not need to win like all the time. He needs to surrender sometimes to achieve more broad, more larger goals. You know.
Well, yeah, but that's tactical positioning. It's not empathy. I mean, I'm sorry, but I'm sort of with him. I mean, the reason I say that is, it's like Steve Jobs. You know, people understood that the guy had the vision, and the guy actually at certain points took no prisoners. You know, people. You know, because he was so focused on this goal. You see, one of the other things I've got to tell you, and this is a mistake of mine. I used to do this a lot. Was that I wanted everybody to be with me. Okay, that's you and you and you and you and you and everybody, and even the person in the back. You know, everybody had to be on board with my idea. And the problem with that is that it's very unlikely to happen. It's extremely unlikely that you're going to get everybody buying into your vision. And then the question is, how do you move forward? I read a lot of Churchill. I read both the books he writes and his biographies, and I'm kind of like fixated on him because I find him a very interesting person. And you know, once he gets going on, you know, this is what we're going to do. You know, if you cross him, he's just going to keep going. And empathy in terms of, well, let's try it again. Let's try it from a different angle. Relationships. You have to be able to create relationships, and how you use those relationships is very important. And you need a little bit of empathy in there to create the relationship. But being an empathetic person and being able to take a lot of criticism and slow down and make sure everybody's on board, it doesn't often allow you this execution, this need to move forward all the time. And people in these sort of very you know, stretch visions often leave people behind, because you can't, because when you say we're going to go from here to there, and there is a long way away, it's not for everybody. And by the way, while I'm on the subject of it's not for everybody, leadership is not for everybody. I mean, I call this course Practical CEO. Being a CEO is definitely not something that's for everybody. It's a lonely, unpleasant sometimes, often, hugely stressful, it isolates you. You know, this is not something that everybody should aspire to. And if you don't aspire to being the CEO, there's absolutely nothing at all wrong with that. And the same is true of leadership. You know, you don't need to become a leader. I mean, it isn't, actually at the end of the day, in some respects, you know, if you take a population and everybody wants to be the leader, who's going to be the follower? You know, so it doesn't suit everybody's character type anyway. And I think, and that also deals with this win-lose kind of issue. And now, let me just make an upfront statement that you need to understand. I've spent 20 years in this country. I spent, well, I suppose I spent another 20 years. I'm not, it's not, they don't, some of them overlap, but I spent 20 years in 11 different countries. I've spent 20 years in this country because I love this country. I love the people, I love the culture, I love the business environment, I love the difficulties, I love the complexities, I love the annoyance factor, I love the adrenaline, I love everything positive about the country, and I hate, and then I could go through another long list. But on balance, the reason I've stayed is that your country is a country that has truly held my interest for 20 years. And it puts me in a position, if I feel like I need to make a statement, where you may disagree with me, but please don't think that you're listening to some foreigner that doesn't know what he's talking about and doesn't understand Russia. I don't claim that I know Russia as well as you, of course I don't. But the fact is I love the country, and so if I say to you, as I will now, that in Russia, one of the problems that you face is that there is an authoritarian leadership style which is welcomed by a large portion of the Russian population. And whether that's an authoritarian leadership style, you know, for the president, whether it's an authoritarian leadership style inside companies, there is a sense in this country that what people want are very clear instruction, and they want to be able to follow them well, and they want to be able to do their job as they're told to do. And there is, of course, exceptions to that rule. There's huge numbers of people here, young people particularly, who've grown up in a completely different environment to their parents, who question lots of things, who require a more democratic approach to decision making. And of course, that's completely true as well. But I'm saying that in this, generally, if you were to generalize, and you should never generalize, by the way, because it only works in general, it doesn't work in the specific. But if you generalized about Russia, an authoritarian style is one that is better received than a democratic style in a country. Now, where that is positive is that it makes it extremely responsive in crisis situations. There's, you know, as a crisis manager, you want to be able to run into a building on fire, and you don't want to say, what should we all do? You know, when you arrive, particularly when the fire's already there and the people that started the fire are still in the room, you don't say, well, so everybody, we've got a fire, now what do we think we should do today? Because honestly, there's no time, the place is going to burn down. What you do is you say, listen, I'm a fireman, I've been in a fire before. You do that, you do that, you do the other, you take the ladder, you attach the hose, you push the button, whatever it is. You're not asking for a conversation, you're giving a direct order. And in certain situations, and by the way, crisis situations is definitely one of them, that sort of authoritarian management style is extremely effective. Over time, it doesn't create leadership. Because over time, people don't respond well if they don't think that they're being heard.
Stuart, I'm sorry, the question I'm obliged to ask now. In your opinion, are those guys on the top, are they handling the current crisis efficiently?
Oh, that's a terrific question, and you're going to have to keep it in mind, and we'll get to it when we get to it, because it's a longer... I think that question, keep the question, and that's a question I'll deal with when I give you my 10 cents on what I think is going on in the country. So keep it, I'm not dodging it, I'm happy to deal with it, I just don't think we'll deal with it now. Okay? Let's have, I think he was a very good, Musk was a very good first leader. Let's get one more leader up. Somebody else got a leader? Before I point at them, and then you have to have a leader. Come on, somebody. I'm just going to stand here. Do you know what one of the most effective tools in negotiation is? Silence. Gun? So, oh yeah, yeah. Yes, as long as the other guy doesn't have a bigger one. Silence. So, somebody before I point, come on.
Okay.
Okay, go.
Well, okay, there are in fact a lot of people who can be, well, leaders.
No, I didn't ask for that, I asked your favorite.
Okay, let us see Bill Gates.
Okay, why Bill Gates?
Bill Gates, well, he as a Musk, as many other people, he's a sort of visionary.
Yeah.
He foreseed the future of the computers.
Yeah.
At the time when nobody believed it, when it was some kind of a toy for some geeks.
Yeah.
So basically he foreseed the future of the computers.
So he's a visionary, yeah.
He was a visionary. He was a great organizer. He organized the company, the marketing tools and all that.
Yeah.
So he was able to monopolize the market efficiently, whether it was good or bad. And he was able to maintain this position, well, practically until now.
Yeah.
So, and...
what skills did he use?
Well, I think he was very good at marketing. He was very good in promoting his product to the users, to the companies, and in organizing selling networks and all that.
And by the way, what's the one thing that all of these guys have to be good at? They've got to be good at picking other people.
No.
But you know,
basically, yes, and basically in negotiation with business partners and all that, because it was his first achievement when he licensed this program from other company, the DOS system.
Yeah.
So actually, it was not his development. So he managed to buy it and push it to IBM.
Right. Okay, I mean, I think he's another very strong, and he has both the visionary characteristic, but also the skills to be able to actually make it, to give it traction. Just a sort of one of those things that you should remember: if you hire dwarves, you'll be big, but you'll never grow. If you hire people that are less than you, because that way you can dominate them, your business will be stunted. Your business will never grow. What you need to do, what you should do, is you should hire people that challenge you, that cause their teammates to improve their performance, that actually create the energy and create a desire to be better. Now, where this gets difficult, and we'll be talking about it at some point, is how do you integrate stars in a team? You know, and as a CEO, I've often been faced with an incredibly strong corporate finance guy who can bring in the customers, generate the revenues, but pisses everybody off. So he's like his own little kind of like, you know, black hole, that everywhere he goes he annoys his colleagues. People don't want to work with him because it's all about him, but at the end of the day he is the guy that's connected to the revenue. He's the rainmaker, he can bring in the revenues. And you know, if you want to say in a bank where these sort of character types, you know, bang into each other, is you get guys who are corporate bank relationship managers, and then you get investment bank deal guys, and the corporate bankers are the farmers, and the deal guys are the hunters, and then you put them in a room, and all you can hear is the relationship managers saying, but these guys keep stealing my clients, they never tell me what they do, they go out behind my back, they're not cooperative, and you hear the deal guys say, but these people in relationship management, they don't have real access, they're not credible, of course I'm not going to tell them. And so this business of how you integrate, you know, I was just telling you to hire strong people, but then it isn't good enough to just hire strong people. You actually have to create the fabric of your management team, and the fabric of your management team finds it very difficult to absorb star people. So you have to work out how the stars integrate, how many stars you need, and how you make them work well within a team. If one of the questions had been when you open, how do you actually choose a management team and how do you manage a management team, that's a very viable question, and one we should get to deal with. The way I plan to do this is, I thought if we started at 7, if we go to 8:30, and then we have a 15-minute break, and then we do 8:45 to 10, if that's acceptable. Okay, so, well, we've covered this. I don't think there's anything particular I want to spend time on. It's a varied career. It's both emerging markets and OECD. It's both transactional relationship, and it's both Western and Russian. So I was the first foreigner to run a Russian bank. And I can assure you that the cultural, you see, 25 years at Citibank didn't actually prepare me for dealing with a full-on oligarch at all. you know, because in a Citibank environment, you are surrounded by policies, practices and procedure. You're in a public company, it has certain broad reporting requirements. It has a corporate culture that is extremely, it's you know, you can almost viscerally feel it, the corporate culture, and it has, you know, a period of time to develop that. In Bank Soyuz with Deripaska, well, Bank Soyuz was actually 3 captive banks that were pushed together. There weren't really bankers in the bank. There was certainly no independent credit process. There was certainly no corporate culture. It was certainly not one that you want to talk about. And therefore, you know, to build a bank out of that and to deal with a shareholder who is an extremely aggressive oligarch, that period, 2004 to 2007, was the most. It was the most challenging and in a way the most rewarding for me because it really pushed me to the limit. And I take a lot of the stories that I tell from there. So we'll cover these things, the role of the CEO, risk and crisis management, and then actually the sort of meat, the stuff I really enjoy is the characteristics of leadership and the importance of successful failure. For those that didn't catch the successful failure, it is how to absorb the lessons that you get given when you fail, not to deny the opportunity of learning from your failure. So we've already done a couple. I would, each time we start another session, I would like the volunteers to volunteer, please, or I'm happy, you know, pointing fingers, don't worry. But try and think outside the box. You know, was Stalin a great leader? Was Hitler a great leader? Leaders, they don't come. I didn't ask you who was a good leader. I asked you who was a leader. So, and well, I did say favorite leader. So maybe we should take out favorite. Who was a great leader? And great leaders don't necessarily come as good guys or bad guys. I mean, I think the devil's a great leader. You know, he's got all the sex appeal, you know, he offers a lot of very attractive incentives, and he has a lot of followers, but he's the devil. So it doesn't have to be, you know, a person that's a good person. So here are some things that will cover the role of the CEO. First of all, leader, not a manager, humility is an asset. There's a lot of this stuff that's kind of like you're just going to sit there, and you may groan the first time you see it, or you may say, you know, so what? Just give me time to get through enough material to start getting out some of my themes. One of my themes about humility is, you're obviously on some level you can't be a leader if you don't have some arrogance, if you don't have confidence, if you don't believe in yourself. But on the other hand, if you stop listening to people, if you stop understanding that you're getting input from third parties that is very relevant to you, you run the danger of basically a trip at the last moment. I'm not going to talk about my example because I ran into this problem, but I'll tell you another example, and actually it has 2 lessons in it. Rory Cullinan is one of my closest friends. I've known him for 20 years. He was at Citibank with me. He actually was in the leverage buyout group. He did a leverage buyout deal, and actually when the deal closed, he left the bank and joined the equity of the company, which was kind of a bit of a tricky thing to do because he'd negotiated quite a lot of the covenants, and then he suddenly turned up on the other side of the desk. But that deal then went wrong, and I was put in to be the crisis manager, the remedial manager of that transaction. So I had to take a guy who'd been my next door buddy and actually deal with him face to face in an environment that was extremely stressful because we were looking at up to a $200 million provision. Rory went on through, we sorted it out. Rory went on through his career to go from one success to another. He built a personal fortune. He then went into the Royal Bank of Scotland. He was briefly in Russia with Renaissance Partners, and he left after a couple of years. He went back into Royal Bank of Scotland. He led their bad bank. So when RBS had to get rid of its assets, he was the guy that led the bad bank. He did it so successfully that he was the highest paid director in the Royal Bank of Scotland, which is one of Europe's largest banks, and they made him in February of this year the head of the investment bank. And when they made him the head of the investment bank, and this is one of my best friends who I see all the time, I watched in him over this period a growing sense that he could do no wrong. That actually each step that he took was more and more successful, and he reached this level, this very, very senior level, where the Financial Times, if you Google him, the Financial Times was talking about him as the prospective future chairman of RBS. And he never actually propagated that rumor himself, but there again, when people started to say that to him, he didn't say, well, that's ridiculous. He started sort of to believe in it. Has anybody seen The Devil's Advocate, the movie?
Yes.
Yeah, it's got that wonderful final line from the devil, arrogance, my favorite sin. You know, is it arrogance? Yes, it's arrogance. It's when you believe too much in yourself. Now, the trouble for Rory was, what happened next was another lesson which you should all learn, please, which is social media is out there forever. And if you have a photograph out there forever, and you're ever in a compromising situation, it's like compromat in the old days with the FSB or KGB, somebody will make sure it gets leaked. And for poor Rory, what happened, he has 3 daughters, the middle daughter's a teenager, he has problems with her, they were in a relationship difficulty, father-daughter. He was at a board meeting for the Royal Bank of Scotland, big publicly owned bank it's like being in Sparebank, right? And he sends a Snapchat photograph to his middle daughter, and he writes on it, Dad, bored at a board meeting. B-O-R-E-D at a B-O-A-R-D meeting. Bored at a board meeting. Funny, huh? Nothing harmful. But he's writing it in the middle of a board meeting, and you can see the boardroom in the background. But it's Snapchat, so what could possibly go wrong? So what went wrong was his daughter did a screenshot of the Snapchat before it disappeared and put it on her Instagram account, saying, my dad is the coolest dad in the world, you know, and there's the picture of Rory, the new head of the investment bank, saying, I'm bored at a board meeting. He was fired. He was fired, nothing whatsoever to do with that photograph. He was fired because he'd let his arrogance and he'd let his style alienate enough people that when the CFO went to the CEO and said, because the problem was that Rory had taken the same approach with the investment bank as he had with the asset sale business, where he said, I'm responsible for everything in the investment bank, including access to finance, including all of the elements of timing. And he thought he'd negotiated that. But then they hired a new CFO who said, actually, I'm the CFO of the group, I'm responsible for the finance. Rory said, no, you're not. CFO went to the CEO, said, you either fire him or you fire me. Rory was fired. He was fired because he got up to a level where he was not listening properly. He was not paying attention to what other people were saying. Not that you have to always do what everybody says, but you've got to be very careful you don't overreach. And of course what happened was that, you know, he was fired. It was just before the general election in England. Labour looked like it might have been winning. The newspapers ran his photograph on the front page for like a month, making fun of the highest paid director in Royal Bank of Scotland who was bored at his own board meeting just after he was approved. So there were 2 parallel stories. One was the story of power and overreaching, and it happens all the time. The higher up you get, the thinner the air. I just saw Everest at the weekend, you know. You don't want to get too high because if you're too high for too long, the air is too thin. And he started to believe his own PR. And now, you know, he just spent a month at my house. He's putting himself back together. He's learnt the lesson. One of the things that the bank has done for him, which of course they should have done for him before, is that they interviewed everybody that he dealt with. And they got people to give their honest assessment of the good news and the bad news, and then they delivered it. By the way, when you deliver HR information, you should always use the sandwich approach. Anybody know what the sandwich approach is? So a sandwich approach is you've got the message, and so if you just give the message, listen, you know, 30% of the people we talk to think you're an arrogant guy who doesn't listen. The arrogant guy doesn't hear it because he's just responding to what he regards as negative feedback. So what you do is you say, listen, 70% of the people think you're a fantastic whatever it is that you want to say, and then once you've given the good news, you then give the message. And then in the final part of the sandwich, you go back and you repeat the negative part, but you include in the positive part. And it's simply a way of trying to make the message, which is the middle piece, digestible. Often I was accused, quite rightly, that I knew more than anybody else in the room about banking. So when I was launching HSBC, I would sit there and I would, I'd actually been down on the bottom of the engine, and I knew how to build an engine from the ground up, because I'd done it for 25 years. But I would be so involved in talking about executional elements that people weren't listening to my leadership. Because what they heard was, they heard somebody they regarded as criticizing their skill base. Because it would be like being a conductor in an orchestra and suddenly putting down the baton, running over to the trumpet section going, you don't know how to play the trumpet, this is how you play the trumpet. You blow the trumpet for a while, you give them back the trumpet, and you go back up on stage and then you're conducting. Well, of course, that trumpet player is going to remember that. And they're not going to be listening, they're not going to be looking at your baton. They're going to be remembering that you have, whether it's directly embarrassed them, but you have demonstrated that you know more about their skill than they do, and that's an embarrassment. So how you actually deliver messages in a leadership role is extremely important. And even if you know way more than everybody else, you don't necessarily have to display that. Because if you've lost the capacity to communicate, if you're no longer being able to get across the core messages, having the specific skill base isn't going to work. Because leadership is much more than simply telling people how to actually turn the screw. You've got to get them turning the screw together, and that requires a different set of skills. So you're a leader, not a manager.
Stuart.
Yeah.
And speaking of arrogance, what do you think of such guy as Donald Trump, who said a lot of controversial things on national television and had a lot of conflicts with many important people all over the United States and the world, and yet a lot of supporters and business people think he is the guy to do the job?
Never underestimate the stupidity of others. I mean, it always, and they, whenever the US elections come along, it is always absolutely amazing to me, the characters that start to come out of the woodwork. To me, somebody that talks like that guy talks, and the way he dismisses women, and the way he dismisses immigrants, and his whole attitude to his fellow human being is so antipathetic. I can't understand how anybody can listen to him. And you know what? I bet there were some people that said that about Adolf Hitler. I bet there were some people, rebel-rousing people who Mussolini, people, I'm not trying to compare Trump with Mussolini, but people who harvest other people's insecurities, who, and this is of course where, politically life gets very dangerous if you, and I'm not going to make anything more than this statement, if you have a great country that has been made to feel less than great, and somebody then appeals to their sense of insecurity, you can get away with a lot of things that you shouldn't be allowed to get away with. Because you are viscerally pulling your audience towards you at the expense of other people. And if you look, obviously the classic example is Germany in the 30s. If you look at what went on there, it was the Versailles Treaty was a bad treaty. There was hyperinflation. You had a whole nation made to feel small, and you had one man who was able to create symbolism and was able to have an oratory capacity, and who was able to make them feel good about themselves. And the fact that it was at the expense of someone else, well, that just made them feel better about themselves. And so people like Donald Trump, to me, do this thing of they never rise above others by pushing them into the mud. It's just, you know, I mean, there are some things that I want to say here that are just about being good people. I don't want, I mean, I'm not here to try, I'm not preaching, you know, I'm not evangelically preaching, you know, you've got to be a good person. But honestly, I think that if you benefit at other people's expense, eventually the world is round and eventually you're going to run into those people. And I'm going to be honest with you, I think that there were periods in my career, especially in my 30s, where I was a people user. People were available to me to be used in these crisis situations to allow me to continue to build my career. And if you look at my CV within Citibank, I was given bigger and bigger and bigger jobs because I was extremely efficient. But all of my roles were less than 2 years. And the reason they were all less than 2 years was that I was put into play. I did what I had to do to further my, well, actually it was the institution's goals, at the expense of my relationships with the people that I was managing, not leading. And the bank understood that, so what they would do is they would kind of like roll me into one situation. I'd be extremely efficient in terms of achieving the objectives. I wouldn't create any of the relationships that would allow me to then take the business forward, and then pull me out of the business and put me into another business where I would cause these changes to happen. And it was an extremely effective business model right up until I got to a point in my career where some of the people that had worked for me before and had the pleasure of my company before were in positions of some authority of their own. And when you use people in that way, they remember it. You know, they may not be in a position to do anything about you right at that particular point in time. But God help you if at some stage in the future they find themselves in a position to affect your career. Because if you've dealt with them that way, they will remember it. So a general sort of, you know, recommendation is, well, it's an old English saying, I don't know if you have it in Russia, be nice to people on the way up because you don't know who you're going to meet on the way down. You know, if you tread on people in a sort of, I'm going to use you and I'm going to get better than you and I don't care what happens to you, then if those roles are reversed, they'll remember that. Okay, strategic direction, it's about horizons. Actually, when we talk about strategic direction, my sister's a sailor. She used to be a doctor. She worked around the world, but now she's a sailor. She's been on a boat off and on for 5 years. And she tells me in any trip, you need 2 pieces of information before you can start a trip. What are the 2 pieces of information you need? Before you can even think about going on a trip. You need 2 things. You need to know 2 things. Well, you need to know a lot of other things. What are the 2 essential things?
Direction.
No. No. You need a place. You need a destination. That's one thing. What's the other thing?
Price.
What?
The team name.
Sorry?
The team?
No, you can build all this. This is sort of, I'm getting back to a real starting point. You need to know where you're going.
Weather.
No.
Language.
When you arrive.
No.
When you want to be
Like,
there.
by the way, with sailors, it's really annoying. They don't give a damn when they arrive. I mean, generally. You know, you say, when are you going to arrive? Well, we're going to arrive when the weather, you know, takes us there. Yeah?
How to get?
No.
Where?
No, you're all nearly there, but you're not quite there.
Potential costs.
No, that's a very interesting point. No, I mean, all of this is stuff that comes after you establish the 2 principal things to start with.
With whom you travel?
No? Okay, I'll take you out of your misery. You need to know where you're starting from. If you don't know where you're starting, I mean, yes, you need to know where you're going, but if you don't know where you're starting from, everything else is irrelevant. The team, the weather, the cost, everything. Because if you don't know where you are, you can't plot what your trip is. And so, you know, by the way, and when you take over any sort of leadership role, the first thing you've got to do is work out where you are before you start to plan where you're going. Because if you don't know where you are, how are you actually going to create? You need a vision of where you want to go to, but if you don't know where you are, you're not even going to be able to start the first stages of the execution plan. But horizons, you know, and by the way, there's an interesting thing that happens in a crisis. In a crisis, horizons collapse. You see, and actually, if you're in a business as usual environment, the CEO's role is to look over the horizon, and of course, when you're looking over the horizon, you're dealing with these very sophisticated concepts of where is it that the business should develop over time in terms, not just in terms of cash flow, but in terms of core competences, in terms of renewability, in terms of, these are issues around where is the value, not today's, of course, one of the problems is that, if you look at today's stock, if you take a public company, the share price is supposed to reflect the value not of the business today, but the business today in a discounted future cash flow sense. In other words, today's value is the value of that enterprise discounted over an appreciable horizon, so that actually you're not just saying what's the assets worth, but you're saying what is the value of the company over a certain time frame. And that's what the value is today. The problem that occurred, of course, that we all now know about, is that when, as we did in the subprime markets, most obviously, is that when the value to the individual is no longer aligned with the value of the company, so that actually I make $15 million this year if I've done a certain volume of bad deals, but I still take away my $15 million. If that's not aligned with the long-term value of the company, obviously, that's where you get this short-term values to the individual trumping, becoming more important than the long-term value of the company. In a crisis, what happens is that a lot of those long-term values that you're looking out become short-term in terms of horizon, because if you're dead tomorrow, where you're going to in 6 years' time is no longer relevant. And we'll spend a lot of time when we talk in terms of crisis of the balance between having enough oxygen. I'll probably come up, I will repeat myself, so sorry about that. We'll be together long enough, I'll repeat myself. I apologize in advance. In a crisis, the person with the biggest oxygen tank is the person that wins. That oxygen tank, if you're 30 meters under the water and your competitor's oxygen tank is almost empty and yours is full, you can buy his assets, you can take his business, you can take his market share, you can take his people, because he's run out of oxygen. And that oxygen takes various forms, the most obvious of which is cash. If you've run out of cash in a business and you can't access resources, then your ability to maintain your business is zero. And the question that everybody faces at the start of a crisis is how much do they cut in to their resources to generate that cash? How many staff do they fire? How quickly do they reduce their R&D budgets? How quickly do they reduce their capital expenditure? And of course this is quite complex, because one of the things it assumes is that you know how deep you are under the water. Because actually, if what's happened is that you're in a V-shaped recession like 2008, 2009, and you cut out too much in terms of people, you've got to hire those people back in again when the market comes back within 18 months, and that's very expensive. And you've damaged your relationship with your client base because you've run around not honouring your obligations to your clients. It was quite noticeable in Cebu. I had a kind of interesting conversation with the CEO when we cut the line, and then I had to go back and have another interesting conversation with him when I wanted to restart business. And of course people remember what happens in a crisis. So on the one hand I was protecting capital by not dispersing the loan. On the other hand I was damaging a client relationship in the medium term, which when it turned out to be a very short recession was extremely difficult. And so this business of how you manage horizons is something that you're going to bear in mind all the time, and that during a crisis itself you'll find that it's very exciting. A crisis is terrific because it causes you to have to make fundamental decisions much more rapidly. You don't have the time to weigh up the pros and the cons. You have to react far more quickly, because the variances in market share and the variances in your profitability, cash flow, are much greater in a crisis, and the variance is therefore something that you have to control. It's great fun. Primary, broadly defined risk manager. People always think, particularly financial people, that risk management is the CFO or the risk manager that's in charge of, financial risk. But in a corporation, whether it's a bank or any other organization, risk is, what is risk? How many risks can you think of? Give me some risks.
Financial operation.
Okay, that's financial risk, operational, yeah.
Market risk.
Market risk, yeah, that's financial sort of.
External and internal risk.
External, okay, what's an external risk?
Credit risk.
Credit risk, that's financial again.
Regulatory risk.
That's regulatory outside your control, absolutely, yes.
Competitors.
Sorry, competitors. Never ever make the mistake of thinking that you're in a glorious position where you make decisions and that's all that counts. Every decision you make is made within the matrix of the competitors. What you do is only relevant relative to what the competitors do. If you increase your prices and the competitors don't, you're losing market share. If you create an interesting hiring program, you hire people your competitors don't. If you hire too many people and you get your expenses are running too strongly, but your competitors are running low cost base, then they win. It's always in relation to your competitors. Yeah.
Reputational risk.
Yeah. Reputational risk. And reputational risk impacts another core asset, which is your brand. And brand is the ability to have super pricing. So a brand is simply the ability to price your product at a level higher than you would otherwise be able to price it because of expectation from the marketplace, built through the investment, not just in, people think of it as, oh, there's a Coca-Cola brand. It isn't. The brand is comprised of a number of different elements, including customer satisfaction, product quality, the brand itself, the offer. So for instance, when we were launching HSBC into this marketplace, we were flying English carpenters over to Moscow because we wanted to make sure that the carpentry was the same in Russia as it was in... I thought that was excessive. But the point was that all elements of our product had to be at a global standard. If you have a global brand, you can't afford any one location to fall below that quality, because if it does, it damages the overall brand. Look what happened to VW. I mean, I'm absolutely, has everybody followed that story? 25% of their market value has been removed because they were fiddling with their I don't know who was responsible for it, but when they did their emission controls, they built in a software that actually, when they had their diesels running, churned out all this, negative, bad news emission. And then when they went for a test, it automatically, I don't know how it knew, but it automatically reduced their emissions. And the moment that the test was over, it went back to churning out this stuff. But of course, in the US, that means that every single vehicle, I think, has now got a $40,000 fine. And this has cost them billions, and of course, completely damaged their brand, their core brand values, because the brand value is more than just what the product is, but also all the things around that brand. So broadly defined risk manager, actually it includes, human capital risk, it includes physical risk, it includes legal risk, regulatory risk, industrial risk. I mean, I've got a list, we'll get to that in the crisis section. But so, and when a CEO takes that role, of course he has people reporting to him, but ultimately he is the broadly defined risk manager for all of the risks for the company. You're the spokesperson for the company. And the point that I'd make here is you're never off duty. When you're drunk in a nightclub at 4 in the morning in Soho rooms and you're the CEO of a bank, you're still the CEO of the bank. And if Kommersant gets a picture of you, clinging on to a couple of ladies of the night looking like you're, off your head on drugs, that image, can be used, and that image is going to damage your company. So when I say that, you're the spokesperson for the brand, also, by the way, PR risk. I mean, and we'll talk about it when we get into risks. In a PR environment, where you're controlling an environment, so when we launched, let's take when I launched HSBC, you can, I think it's still on the web, you can actually see, the opening day and this and that and the other. And we practice, CEOs practice how to present the storyline, and then almost as importantly, how to manage Q&A. So what you do is you take your PR company and your staff and you get them to ask the most difficult questions that they can come up with, and you practice how to respond to those questions in a press conference environment. And the most dangerous time in a press conference environment is not when you're sitting behind the podium and you've got your advisors on all your different sides and you've got everybody in front of you. The most dangerous time is as you finish. Thank you, you're pretty much on time, so let's get back, heads in the room. So we've got about 50 minutes. I thought actually it was better to do it this way around because actually I also have to get used to you, and I thought that a 3-hour session followed by a 3.5-hour session followed by a 4-hour session sort of gradually builds up rather than forcing you to deal with me for 3.5 hours immediately. So I had a question that was asked, which is how to, if you're in the role where you don't have a leadership position, you are an expert. Sorry, guys. If you're in the room, you're in the room. If you want to go outside and chat, you're welcome. But the fact is that if you're in an expert position, think about it. How are you going to stand out? Well, you're going to stand out not because you're going to try and say, oh, me sir, I want to be the manager. You're going to stand out because you're the best expert. You're going to stand out because you create the skill base. This is something that's very important that sometimes gets lost. I mean, I saw this in the 2000s, that there was this whole business of title inflation, that you had young guys being promoted and promoted and promoted, and every year they get a new title, and so they'd get more and more impressive titles. The only problem was that they hadn't picked up any skill base along the way, so what they were really good at was writing resumes and having interviews. And they didn't stay anywhere long enough to build a skill base. Now, if you are at that stage where you are in a role as an expert, the thing that the thing that should be your goal every day is to be the very best in terms of acquiring the skills that you need to do your job and to execute your job. You should stand out by excellence. You should stand out by the ability to actually execute what you're being asked to do, rather than saying, me sir, I should be the manager. As a person that's looked out at other people, now the problem comes, okay, let me just use this as a quick opportunity to say something else about careers. Careers are not escalators. You don't get on the ground floor and then the escalator gradually rises and you go from the ground floor to the 5th floor and it just goes and all you have to do is stand there, right? I mean, first of all, there's quite a lot of effort involved. Secondly, all careers, in my experience, I mean, it doesn't apply to everybody, but in most cases, have periods of great acceleration, followed by a plateau, followed by maybe a slight decrease when you go off and try and learn other elements of the business. So here you are, you become a terrific expert, you get promoted, you're at that level, you realize that if you're going to get to that level, actually something that you have to do is go off somewhere else, take a slightly lower position so that you can acquire new skills. You acquire the new skills, you reposition yourself, and then you move forward again. So on the one hand, you're going through a slightly different profile, and then on the other hand, there's this other wave, which is, are you getting more out of a company, or is the company getting more out of you? And there's periods in time where, frankly, you may well be coasting. You will have achieved a certain amount. You'll be able to get into a period where you will relatively be taking from the organization more than relatively the organization is giving to you. And there'll be other periods, the other way around, where, and I'm afraid at the start of a career, it tends to be that you get squeezed enormously for your expertise and your time and your energy, because as young people you have far more energy than us older guys. But the fact is that you are in a position where you are giving more to the organization than the organization is giving to you. And we were just talking in the break about, the Ernst & Young pay scales, for instance, or in fact, actually any partnership relies on a very broad base, where the assumption is that you start with a very broad base and that gets churned. The expectation is that not everybody that joins EY ends up a partner of EY, because there isn't room. And that means that you create during that early stage in your career skills that you can use in other, in other careers, in other organizations. You leave and you move on to those other organizations. But the overall point that I'd make is you have to understand that not every day can be, you can't be better in every day in every way. There are going to be long periods of time where it seems like you don't have your big breakthrough moment. And you have to, don't make a mistake here. You're going to spend more time in the office than you're probably going to spend at home in terms of, how many hours you spend working. And if when you get to 60, you look back on your life and you say, God, they were miserable years. I hated my job, I hated the colleagues that I worked with, I hated what we did, I don't know why I did it, I'm still here, I don't know why. You've just wasted your life, and you only get one of these, unless you're a Buddhist, in which case, you're in for a few more thousand. But the fact is that, for most of us, we get this one chance at life, maximize it, make the best out of it. And that doesn't mean, you go to a job and it doesn't fit you, so you immediately leave. You've got to have some patience, you've got to be prepared to invest, but you've got to have something that ultimately you understand it sort of suits you. And if after 2 or 3 years it isn't suiting you, find something else to do. Because the worst thing is to spend your life in something that doesn't fit, because that is your life eventually. And the trick is that it isn't going to feel every day as though it's the best thing, and it may not feel if I look back at my career, you've seen my career, it looks pretty good, right? It didn't feel pretty good the whole time. There were big chunks of it that felt like I was going nowhere, or that felt that, actually I managed to change countries enough that even when things were kind of plateauing, the countries were changing, so it made that very exciting, but that was the way I wanted. But having said that, there's a price to pay. If you move country every 2 years, your personal life is in the shredder. If every couple of years you have to create new friends, build a new house, create new relationships, and then move to the next country and do it all over again, you get pretty good at sort of house moving. But in terms of how you manage your relationships, it can be a nightmare. So where were we? We don't fight every fight. Inspirational, not directional. But actually, this is an old slide, and what I would say here is, generally, leadership is about getting people to do things. That is about getting people to do things you want those people to do, but having them do them for reasons they think are their own. So if I can get you to do something, which is something that basically I'm trying to get you to do, but your motivation for doing it is your own motivation, my chances of getting you to work hard, to be focused, to be successful are much greater than if I'm just doing this by threat. If I'm doing it by, if you don't do this, you're not going to get promoted. If you don't do this, you're not going to get your bonus this year. That sort of threat is a very negative energy. And of course I used it in change management situations, because in a change management situation, often in an urgent crisis situation, you don't have the time. At least that was my excuse. You don't have the time to allow people to buy in. You have to tell them what to do. But over any length of time, being inspirational is much more efficient and productive. If in a crisis, I'll talk about this in crisis management. If in a crisis, you come in and, things aren't looking good. I haven't slept last night, and, I've looked at the numbers and, I don't know what to do. Who's going to follow that person? Who's going to take direction from somebody who has collapsed into themselves and who is demonstrating through their very physicality that they've lost control? Now, the other side of this is you don't want to go the other way. I had a boss, and I'm not going to say who it was, but I had a boss who somewhere along the line had been told that to motivate people you have to smile at them. And so this guy would run around the bank and he would leap on these poor people and he would smile at them with this kind of it looked like he was having a spasm. And these people would, and you saw terror in these people's eyes. And then he'd come away and he'd say, yeah, I did a pretty good job. I think I connected with those people. The answer was that they were absolutely petrified because this senior guy had lunged at them with this sort of completely insincere smile. So you've got to be careful how you use your body language. But certainly, and again I'd say from my experience in Russia, if you are communicating uncertainty, if you're communicating fear, that through your body language it will be understood. And also, by the way, actually I'm not going to do it because you'll understand who I'm. Well, maybe I'll do it. I mean, maybe I'll do it off camera actually. So, anybody guess what this body language is? Anybody seen that body language before? Perhaps somebody senior around this part of the world? This is the body language of, hey, I'm relaxed, I'm in charge, amuse me. So see what you can do to get my interest because, I'm pretty relaxed. And so, if you take that, it is a very clear, you are projecting a very clear statement, particularly if you just arrived 3 hours late. You've just told everybody in the room you're the most important person there, and you've indicated through your body language, that you're in control. And of course, you're going to create all sorts of negative, feedback. You have to have courage of your convictions. We're going to cover a lot of these things in characteristics. And so I'm going to actually move on from that. Horizons, today's profit, I've talked about that. I've talked about, these are each of the things. I don't think there's anything here that we haven't talked about. There's no such thing as off-duty. This thing about, well actually it's not really part of spokesman, but consistency. I'll be talking to you at some point about leadership styles. And a leadership style can vary according to an event. So, you can have a very democratic leadership style. What should we all do? I want to hear from you what we should do. I want your responses. I'm going to listen. There's an old saying which is the chairman speaks last. And actually, when you are in crisis management, the bad habit that I got into was I'd walk into the room, I'd sit down, and then I'd start talking. Well, of course, if I start talking, I'm giving out instructions. I'm not listening. And if you're asking for people's opinion and you've just told them what your opinion is and you're the boss, za? Yeah, everybody's za, because you're the boss. So if you create that kind of a precedent, you're not going to hear what other people's views are. And of course, it can get very dangerous because you start to believe, people want to please you. You're the boss. So you say, if you're Hodorkovsky, you say, listen, I don't believe this is serious. I think I should go on a trip around Russia and I should spread the message. Do you think that's a good idea? Yes, boss, we think this is a good idea. And they're all thinking to themselves, no, it's a really dreadful idea. But nobody, if you set it up that way, is going to be feeling that they're in a position to tell you what they should be doing. Now, that sort of democratic approach, you can have that democratic approach, and then if the fire starts burning down the house, you have to switch. You can't afford to keep that leadership style when you're going through a crisis change management situation. So you move from one leadership style to the next. But what I'm not recommending, I really don't recommend, is that you do it Mondays you're democratic, Tuesdays you're authoritarian, and you work your way through the week, each day changing your management style, because the people that work for you don't know when they walk into your office who they're going to meet. Are they going to meet somebody that wants to listen to them, or are they going to meet Attila the Hun, who's going to tell them what to do? So it's consistency relevant to the environment. And if the environment shifts, and by the way, the environment isn't simply what's happening outside the company. It can also be if the company's going through stages of growth. So and the most typical changes in management style that people have issues with is the founder of a startup, then is that person able to take it forward to grow into a medium-sized company, and is that person from medium-sized company able to take it forward into a large company? And for each stages of growth, there are different constituents, investor base, type of people that you hire, type of pressure on processes, culture, attitude to risk. All of these things will change according to which stage of development the company's in. So it's not simply that the external world may cause you to change your management style. It may also be that the stage of development of the company itself causes you to change your management style. And I think we've covered that mostly. This thing about taking an inventory on management, you know, especially when you take over a role, if you know, there's one thing, of course, if I'm starting a company from scratch, I get to hire. And actually, when you're talking about building a company's culture, a principal way in which you build a culture in a company is through the interview process. What are the questions you're asking? What are the characteristics you're looking for in your candidates? What are the values that you're communicating in the way that you talk with people? And obviously, over time, you have to structure this culture so because if I'm going to hire the first 10 people, well, I choose the 10 people that meet that understand what the culture is I want to build. If I'm hiring the next 100 people into an organization that has 3,000 people in it already, my culture is dependent on many things beyond my direct control. So that hiring process that works in terms of creating the core culture doesn't work so well once you get above a certain size, and you need to have culture reinforced by other means, and I'll be talking about how to create cultures. And when you take over a business, when you're the boss, it's a fragile moment, because what you have to do as you come in is everybody wants to create their relationship with you because you're the new guy. And so you'll be told the stories they want you to tell, you'll be fed a certain line, the people that want to get close to you will get close to you, the teacher's pets. All of these things will happen at the front end of you arriving. And you have a certain amount of time in which to analyze your new team, because you're the newcomer, you're the person that's new, you have to decide who's around you. And the question then is, how long do you give them? How long do you give a new group of people? How much information do you need on them? Do you really understand who they are? How much time do you spend with them? And then, critically, there'll come a moment where you've analysed what it is that you've got in terms. Don't forget, for a journey you need a start point and a finish point. Now you've understood where you are. You then spend time deciding what your objectives should be and how you're going to get there. And then, within 30 to 60 days, you then present that to the team. Now, the critical thing at that point is you have to make some decisions about whether or not the people that you've got in your existing team, A, understand your strategy and your plan, B, buy into it, C, are prepared to execute it, and D, are actually going to be positively inclined to move it forward, or are they going to be the passive-aggressive wall that one way or another are not going to want to change. People generally don't want to change. Generally, people like it the way it is, because the way it is good for your habits. You wake up in the morning, you brush your teeth and you comb your hair in that order. You don't comb your hair and then brush your teeth, and that's what you're comfortable doing. And suddenly somebody turns up and wants you to turn things around. And any new set of habits is at the outset uncomfortable. So generally people don't want to shift. And there is this very critical period that goes on, which is enough time to analyse where you are and come up with a plan, enough time to take the information from your team to build a picture of who you've got, enough time to communicate where you want to take people, and then critically you need to make judgment calls on whether or not the people that you've got in front of you, A, are up to the job, and B, are willing for the job. Because you can have people who are up to the job, who have the skill base, but if they aren't on board with your strategy, it doesn't matter whether they can technically do it or not. If they're not motivated to do it, they won't do it. Unless you then implement fear and various other strategies. Now, I had, from Alpha, I had Piotr Schmieder, who's a friend of mine, who's the chairman of the supervisory board at Alpha. And he's come as one of my team leaders that I have come to various classes. And one of the things he said is build on your strengths. You know, if you, and that includes in your team, build on the people that support your perspective. And he said, one of the things he said to me, and we got into it in front of the class, is he said, if you try and convince, if you have 20 people, and you're spending all your time trying to convince the 2 people that don't agree with you, you're saying, listen, let me explain it to you. No, you don't understand. I need to explain it to you some more. Everybody else in the room is waiting for you to continue to lead them, but you're tied up trying to fight this particular battle with the holdout people who actually may never agree with you. And his recommendation is, you give it enough time, you make it clear enough, you create a clear path, and then if people don't get on board, and an old boss of mine used to say, it's like a train. You say, here's the train, there's the rail, you're either on the train or you're on the platform, but you have to decide. If you're on the train, you've got to be fully on the train and you've got to follow the strategy and you've got to follow me. And if you don't want to be on the train, that's also fine, but you have to get off. Don't think you're going to be dragged along by this train if you don't want to go. And I actually, as I replayed, because of course, now for me, management lessons are very interesting. I read a lot, I think a lot about my previous situations, but I don't have my opportunity to be the chairman of another bank, I don't think. I mean, I was actually sort of offered a role, but I didn't get it. But one of my motivations, actually, funnily enough, to want to go back in as a chairman of a bank was to take all of the insight I have caused myself to have through these conversations and say, well, what would I change about the way I would actually run that last bank? I would be able to do a terrific job if I had just one more chance. And so, for me it's slightly frustrating because the insights that I get through these conversations and actually through talking about my life and also talking with other leaders, I'm now absorbing them as information to pass on to you, and then you get to use this information when you become leaders, and I'm going to have to watch you do that. But it's an interesting process. You can't manage what you can't control. Yes, a controlled environment makes sure that once you've made a change, it doesn't slip back to its old ways. Obviously, especially where you have a change environment, old habits die hard, is the saying. And so if you don't have a process by which you're forcing people to do what it is as the new process, the new way of doing things. This is particularly true where you take out levels of management, where where you're trying to reduce the number of processes that occur. People, especially people who've been doing it in a certain way for a long period of time, they'll want to keep falling back, and that's where your process environment will stop that happening. Also, by the way, is that if you have a controlled environment, it allows you more space to be inspirational. If you're not constantly, if your processes are controlling the overall structure of the business, it allows you as a leader, not a manager, to rise above that management process and start to get into how am I going to motivate people to follow my inspiration rather than how do I manage people to do what they're told. By the way, just in case you think it, don't think the management goes, you're walking off the stage, and just as you're walking off the stage, a reporter comes up to you and they go, wow, that was a fantastic launch, Stuart. That was really terrific. I love the way you manage it. By the way, what are you doing about the deposit rate? And you go, well, we're gonna keep it as low as possible because we're a great brand. That's it. That's the quote. We're going to keep it as low as possible because we're a great brand. The moment that you drop your guard, the moment that you let that, that you understand that you're actually communicating something to somebody that can actually go ahead and use that, that's when you're at the most vulnerable. And there's this idea, well, you can have a meeting with a journalist off record. And so, yes, you can. But I can tell you that there's a lot of journalists who say they're off record and they're not off record. And then, and if you get caught on that once, it's very, very difficult to have a conversation with a journalist again. The problem, if you have no relationships with journalists, is that when you have a story that you do want to get out, and you're trying to use your relationship with a journalist to help you get it out, they view you as somebody that's never really cooperated with them, so why would they cooperate with you? So in my experience, and I did this for 15 years, you know, I found very reputable journalists who I actually could rely on for that background statement. And even close friends of mine, I've got one in Reuters and one in Wall Street Journal, even when I had a casual drink with them at night, I would always start any conversation with, and we are off record, is that correct? And if because it's a husband and wife, and if one of them said yes and the other one didn't say yes, I'd say, no, sorry, I want to hear from both of you that we're off record. And even, you know, I mean, obviously you have to have a level of trust, and of course it sounds, you know, slightly overdoing it when you've got people that you've known for a long time. But I still think, even when you've known them for a long time, it's a good habit to get into. And you've got to choose journalists very, very carefully. The press is a very powerful instrument. It allows you to get across your core messages, and it can trip you up. And actually, if I can get on maybe I'll download it onto one of my presentations. I've got a classic example of PR gone wrong with me. I have a 16-year-old son, and this was a photograph done 7 years ago, so I guess he was 9. We were playing chess in Galleria, that was one of the big restaurants back then, and I just won the game of chess, and I was like, yeah! And the photograph that got taken by Commissant was, yeah! And they then got me, because I refused to quote, because they phoned me up and they said, is it true the private bank is opening? I said, I'm sorry, I can't comment on that. I think you need to call me back in 2 or 3 months' time. They took that, you know, I'm not going to comment. And they made it into Stuart Lawson confirms the private bank is opening in 2 or 3 months. And they ran with a picture of me going, yeah. And so, you know, they actually, you know, and expect them to take things out of context, because never forget, a journalist's job is to sell newspapers. It's their principal job, and so if they can create an environment where you've said something or that you've done something where they can use it to sell newspapers, that's exactly what they'll do.
Stuart,
yeah.
Excuse me. You probably heard of a Russian businessman named Oleg Tinkov.
I know him.
Who is the chairman of the board of Tinkov Credit System.
I know him.
So he gave an interview to Financial Times about half a year ago, and when the Financial Times journalist asked him to comment something on why Tinkov's ADRs went down 30-something% since the start of the year, he replied with something like, who cares, they went down this time, they could go up the next time. And of course this was widely spread all around the business press, but yet I don't think that Tinkoff Credit Systems lost a lot of its clients or any of investors' attention since then. So,
well, hang on. I mean, if you want to make it about Tinkoff, he's constantly saying things like that. And I think that, you know, I mean, I don't want to get into too much personal detail about Tinkoff, but he's a larger-than-life figure who has built his, serially built his entrepreneur, you know, ventures in a sort of buccaneering way. And I think a lot of the people that hear him make those sort of comments understand that's in the nature of the beast. I think if you took another businessman, perhaps I'd say almost a more serious businessman, or a less of a buccaneering businessman, and they said something like that, I think it would have an impact. And you've got to also differentiate between, and there I would differentiate between what's happening with the ongoing cash flow of the underlying business and what's going on with the valuation of that business. And so I would expect in another situation that the valuation could change, even if today's cash flow may not immediately be impacted. Because again, it gets into the reason that the overall valuation, the overall cash flow might not change today and tomorrow is, okay, it's not changed today and tomorrow, but your ability to access more capital may be influenced by your relationship with the capital you've already raised. If you say, well, I don't care what happened to the people that invested last time, and then in a year's time you're up in front of investors and you're trying to get the next round of investment, they may remember that. So I don't know I sort of think that it's built into his sort of character of the way that he's gone about his entrepreneurship. If you want to make it specific to Tinker. Arbiter of the senior management team. I was talking about how you actually manage the team. In my case, for instance, at Soyuz, we replaced the whole of the board of directors. We took everybody and replaced absolutely everybody on that board. Well, that's a very fundamental shift, and obviously it requires the support. In my case, I had the support of the only person that counted, which was my shareholder. Where you have a single shareholder, it's a remarkably efficient relationship between the CEO and the equity. What actually is the major objective of a CEO? If you had one phrase, what does the CEO have to do? Shareholder value. To enhance shareholder value. That's principle, and it requires him to have a relationship with regulators, it requires him to have operational processes, it requires a lot of things. But ultimately what he needs to do is deliver enhanced value to the shareholder. And by the way, while I'm on the issue of, because this is an important thing for you to remember, I worked for 25 years for Citigroup. When it was time for me to leave, it was Das Vidania Stuart. Thank you, you've reached the point at which you are no longer contributing to the enhancement of the value of the corporation, and therefore it is time for you to leave. It was a huge shock to my system. I didn't get there overnight, and there was a series of events that led up to it. But at the time, I remember, I thought to myself, I've given 25 years of my life. I've been in 11 countries for these people. I was the guy that turned around all these difficult situations. How can I turn around to them and they're not there anymore? And of course, it's obvious. They aren't they. It's a corporation. The corporation has a responsibility to itself to enhance shareholder value. And if your actions or your deemed actions are not deemed to be enhancing value, it doesn't mean to say you're doing something bad, but maybe you've maxed out at your level. Don't think, never think that there is loyalty. There's this, wonderful loyalty between you and the corporate entity. There may be relationships between you and senior management, but at the end of the day, the entity will roll on. And assuming it doesn't go bankrupt, the entity will roll on, and its primary goal, like its primary reason for being, is to enhance its value, and that's what the CEO has to do. And of course, if you're working in an organisation that is publicly held by a lot of shareholders, you have to go through a very complex series of processes to understand what it is that's an acceptable return on equity, that what it is that's an acceptable set of strategies, that how you communicate with your shareholder. If your shareholding is a publicly quoted company, you have to do it through annual general meetings, through the election of a supervisory board, through the election of a board, and you have to go through this process. If you're owned by a single individual, as long as you can find him, which was always a bit of a problem, but if you can find him, you can sit him down and you can ask him what is his risk tolerance, what's his expectation for return on share capital, all of these sort of things. And it made life on that level extremely easy, because I was able to cover a number of the core elements of his risk tolerance, which would have been very complicated to cover in a broadly held company. And you're responsible for creating this controlled environment. If you don't have you always think of Maggie and her steering wheel. If you don't have a controlled environment, everything else that you're doing is going to be somewhat random. Maybe it'll work, maybe it won't work. And the reason you have processes is that processes create efficiencies. Processes are the means by which you aren't individually sculpting every operation. And those people in the banking world know that you build in a process and you build in checks and balances so that you try and deal with certain risks. The risk of fraud, the credit risk, the counterparty risk, these sort of risks, you build in the processes to address those sort of risks. And you have to maintain morale. So, this stuff is, we'll talk more about this when we talk about leadership, but you have to let go of direct control. And by the way, one of the things that you tend to do as a manager that gets promoted into a leadership role, it is much more comfortable to rely on your skill base. So take me, for instance. I was a corporate bank head for many, many years. I was responsible for the corporate business. When I was made the head of an organization that had a corporate business, a retail business, an investment banking business, and operational divisions, what was the thing I knew the most about? Well, I knew the most about the corporate business. So I kept drifting back into, reviewing the corporate portfolio, analyzing the dynamics of the corporate business. It was the last thing I should do. The thing you should force yourself to do is obviously to understand the dynamics of the other businesses. You already know the dynamics of the corporate business. So you have to let go of direct control. I want to tell you, I'm sort of getting ahead of myself, but one of the stories, and then I'll stop. One of the stories so here's the story. I was told to leave Citibank Russia in 1997, at the end of 97, and I'll get into that story when I talk about successful failure. But I had this one opportunity to go see my boss's boss. Now the problem was that he was flying from Prague to Sydney, and he was flying through London, so I flew to London, well, from Moscow. Well, the only problem was that he was in the departure lounge, and I was in the arrival lounge, and I didn't have a ticket to go out of the country. This was pre-9/11. I was so desperate, I fought my way through security to the departures lounge, and I sat down with this guy. And I had an hour and a half with my boss's boss, and I tried to explain to him my point of view. And and he told me the story. One of the things he said was, Stuart, you were our most effective gladiator. When we had a problem anywhere in the world, we would send you off, whether it was Cairo, whether it was Oslo, whether it was Milan, we would send you off and you'd pull out your sword and you would fight all of the issues and you would win. You'd be blood-stained, and you would emerge from the arena, just like Gladiator, with your bloody sword in your hand, but you would have won. And then we decided to make you Caesar. We decided to take you out of the arena and put you up in Caesar's box. And all you had to do was this or this. You just had to be there, you had to be inspirational, you occasionally had to make decisions, and that was it. And every time we turned around, instead of sitting up in Caesar's box, you were back in the arena, you had your sword out, and you were fighting every single fight. And his message was, you can't, when you are no longer the gladiator, when you're Caesar, you can't fight every fight. And even if you're right, and you're right, you have to let other people make mistakes. Because if you don't let them make mistakes, and if you intervene directly to stop them making mistakes, you are no longer in the leadership role, you're back as a gladiator. And that thing about no need to fight every fight, I think that's where I'll leave it for the break. But it's a fundamental lesson that you have to learn, which is being right and proving that you're right as a manager in a leadership role isn't something that you always have to do. You have to be prepared both to allow mistakes to happen, to let people make their own mistakes, and not to intervene directly. Of course, if they're about to do something truly stupid that's dangerous to the organization or to themselves, obviously you stop them. But that's different from getting involved in every fight. Okay, so I overshot. So shall we make it a 10-minute? I make it 7 minutes to 9. Is that about right? I have a mechanical watch, so I don't know. So if we make it 12-minute break, can we make it back at 5 past? Thank you. was 3 down lunches, 3 and 4 level down lunches. The three down lunch, if it isn't obvious, is you don't talk to your subordinates and their subordinates, you talk to the subordinates below them, 3 down. Now, obviously the first time you get a bunch of subordinates that have been invited to have lunch with the chairman, nobody wants to say anything and everybody's petrified and, you know, there's no real discussion. But if you can create, and this is where humour, by the way, comes in. I mean, not everybody is comfortable with humour, and maybe not everybody feels that it's appropriate. For me, anyway, I like to try and use some humour to sort of lighten the atmosphere. And if you can get an atmosphere going where people feel more relaxed, and you start to hear really what's going on, you know, the problem, I remember we were having problems with ATM being refilled and how quickly they were refilled, and I had the cashiers or the guys actually doing the loading of the ATMs talking about what the issues were. Now the good news is suddenly you've got direct information from the front line. Now what do you think the problem is? That's the good news, you've got the information. What do you think the problem is? Why is that a problem if you've got that direct information and you act on it? You've got 2 levels of management between you and this person. And suddenly this person is identified as a problem. You know, because they've been in an environment with the chairman's then sent a note down to their boss or their boss's boss saying, could you explain, you know, what went on in this refilling process? And it becomes obvious that these people were in a lunch and they talked about a problem and then the chairman followed up on the problem. So the good news about this type of environment is you get direct, raw feedback of what the reality of your processes are. Because one of the problems that you'll come into as you're in a leadership role is getting a visceral feel, not through these channels of people with their own agendas, but actually what it's like dealing with the customer complaints, the customer issues, you know, the products, whether they work, whether they don't work. And once you get this line of communication, you've got to be very careful how you use it. And so quite often I would get information and I wouldn't do anything with it directly, but I'd wait until an opportunity came up and then I'd ask a question that I knew would reveal the problem. So rather than say, somebody said, oh, we've got this problem filling the ATMs, they don't take 1,000 ruble notes, they only take 5,000 ruble notes, let's say, it wasn't that. But, you know, I don't immediately write to the guy's boss and say, why is the ATM only taking 5,000 ruble notes, why not 1,000? I ask that person into my office and I ask them a series of questions, somewhat normally asking them a series of questions, and I get to an opportunity to say, oh, and by the way, does the ATM accept 1,000 ruble notes? And that way I'm able to somewhat disguise the source of my information. That's what I used to think. I'm not sure whether I really succeeded or not. Any questions on that? Oh, see, time flies. Well, let's stop for a second before we get into corporate culture. Questions, comments?
Yeah, so why do you need to disguise the source of information? Let's play it, right? You're my vice chairman, you're the manager, and you're the guy, you know, filling, right? Yeah, now, sorry, I'm not talking to you. We have our lunch, you say to me, we've got this problem, right? And I call you into my office, you know, that afternoon, and I say, excuse me, you know, I understand we have a problem with these ATMs. We don't allow anything less than 5,000 ruble notes. Can you run me through that? Can you explain to me how that works when somebody wants 11,000 rubles and it only gives them 10 because they don't have 1,000 rubles? You're going to turn to, maybe you weren't even aware of it because you hadn't bothered with your 2 down lunches. Now, of course, at this point you'd ask the question whether or not you're a good manager, but the trouble is that you're being blindsided by something that didn't go through the chain of command. So information that I'm using at a very senior level down to you may not have been fed by you because actually you may not I mean, the other problem is that the person may not have even felt like they could say anything to their direct boss. Maybe it hadn't come up before. And suddenly you're put on the spot where it looks like somebody in your division knows something you don't know and you're not aware of. And so you immediately turn around to him and you say, excuse me, but
You know, how come I didn't know about this? And he turns around to him and you go, how come you told the boss, you know, without telling me? That's, I'm you know, exaggerating for effect, but that's the problem, is that you may end up knowing more than the person that works directly for you, which is great. I mean, you know, it's great because you're getting real feedback. Of course, the problem also with this is relevance. Because you're the captain on a battleship, let's call it a battleship, you know, the fact that somebody isn't cleaning the shower properly in the third deck down may not be terribly relevant. And if you get excited because you hear that the shower on the third deck down is filthy, and you call in, you know, the midshipman, you've got to be very careful that you don't pick up every single issue. Because obviously what's important to the guy on the third deck down is the shower. But it may not be important to the running of the battleship whether that shower is clean or not. So relevance and how you use that information is an important factor, rather than simply taking... But by the way, that's something else that goes on in leadership, is you get a lot of negative information from people. You know, people will dump all sorts of this is wrong and that's wrong and the other's wrong. And when you first get into a position of power, there's a sort of knee-jerk thing, oh, I'm going to fix all this. Somebody says to you, oh, this is wrong, and you try and fix it, and then somebody says, oh, this is wrong, and you try and fix it. And the problem is you then get drawn into so much detail. You're busy fiddling with the detail, but you're not doing the thing you're meant to do, which is you're back managing. You get drawn back into managing, and that's, don't forget, that's not what you're meant to be doing. Did I answer your question? You sort of, I think I sort of answered. Yeah. Okay. Any, can I take any you've got to be very careful because of reputational risk, because of you're the bank and you can't afford to take some of the risks that others. But if you can get a lawyer to take an aggressive opinion, then be aggressive about it. I mean, I've been in the remedial management business for a long time. I can tell you, if you want money back from an oligarch, arrest their plane. You know, when it lands in London, arrest their plane. Because, you know, oligarchs love the fact they got their initials, their girlfriends love their initials on it, and, you know, they've got a pink bathroom or whatever it is. So, you know, for them, their plane is really important. It's part of their ego. And if you can get a cross default on their plane, and then you know, they fly into the wrong jurisdiction, you've actually got, you can't do it in Russia because, you know, all the courts are too difficult to get to, but you get it in, you can't do it in London because they know better, they land in the south of France, but you've got some judge in the south of France to put an order in. The moment they touch down, you arrest the plane. It's remarkable how quickly you get repaid. You know, there are two elements of being repaid. There is whether you have the capacity and whether you have the willingness. And you can often find that the capacity is there but the willingness isn't, and you can shift that dynamic by taking control of certain things that are important to them. What's important to you may be different from what's important to me. I think we're nearly there. So can I get, I mean, we've covered a few topics. I sort of feel like I'm beginning to get into some of the things I want to talk about. The really interesting stuff actually we'll get into at the next class, because we'll talk about corporate culture, and we'll also get into the characteristics. I really, you know, to me, talking about characteristics is a key part of leadership, because again, as I say, I'm never going to teach you characteristics. What I can teach you is to be aware of opportunities to build those sort of characteristics. And also, it's a useful exercise to start thinking through, you know, looking at other people, looking at other leaders, and saying, well, what is it that really made them strong leaders? And then working on it, you know, working on that capacity within yourself. But is there anything particularly that you'd like me to start with next week in terms of a topic? Is there anything that you have specifically? Quiet group.
What are the qualities of a leader who runs a startup?
Okay.
What particular qualities should he have?
Qualities of a startup leader. That's good. Any other questions?
Yes, maybe how to communicate your ideas to senior management.
Okay, let's start qualities of a startup leader and how to communicate to senior management. I'm happy to deal with both of those. I, by the way, had in my CV it doesn't show this, but in 2000 I left. Well, I say I left Citibank. Citibank left me, actually, as did my wife the same year. It was a terrific year. But I was then left in a situation where I didn't have a job. So, you know, what do? Well, of course, you know, you start drinking. You know, I was in this one-bedroom apartment in New York. I had a horrible time. I was the whole time in the bar. Life was terrible and going nowhere, blah-de-blah. And eventually a friend of mine called me up and said, I'm launching a fashion brand in England. Do you want to come along and be part of the startup team? And so in the year 2000, I started a fashion company called the Little Black Dress Company, based out of the countryside outside Manchester. It itself wasn't successful, but what it did is it took me out of this very negative cycle. So actually, when you talk about, you know, the qualities of a startup, I didn't get any of that experience in my banking world, but I did actually see it in a startup. So I can start with that. Thank you all very much. I'll see you, I know whatever the next date is, I can't remember, I think it's 13th of October. It's whatever it is anyway. Thank you very much.